Welcome to the podcast that guides men to demystify and develop their intuition. I'm your host, Doug Beitz. Let's dig into the science and expand your horizons. My guest today is Evan Hadfield. I first came across Evan about 6 months ago when he made a YouTube video about the person who won our resort in Micronesia when we raffled it back in 2016. I then discovered he'd created over 200 videos and has a YouTube subscriber base of over 1 million people. Plus his dad is an astronaut. It got me thinking that Evan probably uses his intuition to achieve some of what he does. So here we are, ready to dive into his adventures. Evan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. It's awesome to be here.
Cool. So your video series, Rare Earth, how did that start out?
Well, so, doing videos is something that I'd never done, growing up, if you will. But it always sort of spoke to me. I mean, it's an artistic medium, and all artistic mediums are kind of fun in their own way once you get to know them. I just didn't really know them. And then when my father went to space, we started doing some things in video to sort of promote him. And when he came back to Earth, I did another video campaign and another on the back of that. And we went to the Arctic Ocean on this incredible icebreaker, this Soviet icebreaker from the 80s that I guess they'd rented out, and they were doing sort of like half tourism, half eco tour. It's hard to explain, but I ended up in the Arctic Ocean with all of these artists, many of which did video on YouTube, and one of them had me hold his camera and take him through one of these videos that he was making. And about halfway through, I thought, this is the sort of thing I could do. It's not particularly complicated. Obviously, it's very difficult in one respect. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time and a lot of energy, but at the same time, it's not, you don't need to be a professional going into it to just start, And so from that, I sort of got the inspiration that was an avenue I might follow. And a couple of years later, when I was, I guess, more career ready to move into something like this, my wife and I, we rented a apartment in Chile. Actually, the roof of an apartment, somebody had illegally built a shack on top of this apartment building, and we rented that. Very funny place. We rented that for a month, and just because it was a cheap place to go live, where we could sort of work things out without being stuck with the ideas of home and the routines of home and all that. And she and I discussed, okay, well, like, what do we really want to do? At that point, we're reaching around 30 to maybe 33, and we're, looking at the rest of our lives and peak of our careers, et cetera. And just thought, I don't know, maybe we like talking about the world. We like traveling. We like opening people's eyes to the opposite of what they sort of believe about a place and understand about a place. And we thought really the best way to do that would be video. So we ended up making this YouTube series, and it just started going well enough that snowball rolling downhill type of thing, and sustains itself to this day. It's been an honest pleasure to take part in, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
So I really want to talk to you about the video series, but before we do that, something you just talked about there, when your dad was in space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking, how many boys or girls on this planet can say that? How did you feel?
1,500 people. That's my guess.
Yeah,
That's
out of
estimate.
Out of 8.1 billion people. How old were you when that happened, and how did you feel?
So he was hired when I was 8 by what is the Canadian Space Agency, as we are Canadians, not Americans. So he was hired as a Canadian astronaut when I was 8, I believe. Might have been 7 turning 8, but around that time. Honestly, to say how do you feel, it's hard to explain, because it's like it's been 30 years. It's a long time, and how you feel about it at various times changes just with the course of your life. When you're a teenager and rebellious, you have certain rebellious feelings towards it. When you're et cetera, et cetera. So to say how do you feel, I've felt a lot of things about it over the course of my life. It's just one of those defining features about you. It's like having, I don't know, it sounds negative, but it's having like a large birthmark on your face or something. It doesn't really matter. It's always there. How you feel about it's somewhat irrelevant. It's always there. And so you live with it, and you move around it. It's both good and bad, like everything, I suppose.
Mm. And so did he circle the planet? Did he go to the space station? Like what did he do?
Yes, he commanded the space station. He did 3 missions, 2 with the space shuttle, 1 with Soyuz, which would have been launched from Baikonur in Russia. He did a lot of things as well. He's a very accomplished individual, just not even within being the astronaut, but you'll find astronauts are a certain type of person, A types, and they don't just have one hobby that they're extremely good at. They tend to have multiple. That's what gets them there. So he also does a lot of other things on the side. He's written many books. He's probably Canada's most renowned public speaker. Which, going back to your question before we started this podcast about where I get my speaking skills from, I think that's probably got something to do with it as well. Yeah, so, especially living in the shadow of somebody who's so incredibly accomplished, it gives you a different perspective of life and also what achievement is. And a lot of it sounds privileged, which it is, but it's also a genuine complaint within your own life. For example, within my wife's family, she would be the first person to get a university degree. It's a big deal. That is a very low bar within my family's shadow. So for us, yeah, okay, you got my sister is a PhD psychiatrist or psychologist, and she's an incredible person. She's done incredible things with refugee children and trauma and mental states and curing all this stuff. She's an incredible person. She doesn't, when people meet her, they say daughter of him. Like, she's not a person, even with this massive achievement.
Wow.
You put her in anybody else's family, right? And that would be an obscene level of achievement. But just because of the way you're framed, it just isn't. That's just not how it works. So you just have to accept that,
Wow.
And again, that sounds so negative, but at the same time, it's also this huge blessing in its own right. So it's like the silver spoon that weakens you, if you know what I mean. Like, it's so nice to have the silver spoon, but at the same time, that slowly corrupts and destroys you because it's the silver spoon. I guess that's the guilt of a lot of people. But to me, it's nature. It's second nature. It's how I've lived my life. It's sort of how things are. So I don't really, to analyze it now on a podcast is odd, just because I don't. It's like waking up in the morning and counting your toes. You know how many are there. Nobody ever asks. Count your toes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And so, like, this Russian icebreaker you went for a trip on with your dad, was that a holiday, or was that something he got invited to attend?
No, so when he went to space for his final mission, that was to command the space station, and he was clearly going to retire. I just finished my MBA in Germany, and I'd accepted a job in Frankfurt, nearby where I'd been going to school. But I graduated I'm going to say it was late October, and his flight was in January. So to accept that job, if I did, I would have maybe worked 3 weeks before his flight, and then I would have had to take like a month to go to the flight and deal with all that. So I would have started this job. It was better that I waited until after his flight, and then I found a different job or took that job later, etc. So when he went to space, I had all this free time, 3 months from October to January, whatever it was. So I said, okay, well, I'll manage your marketing, your media, because that's what I did my MBA in, just for that time period. And then when he launched and went to space and did this mission, we were so immediately successful with this marketing campaign, with this PR campaign, if you will, that it just felt natural that I would stick to that. And so after he returned from space, I just continued for I guess you could call it runway, pun intended, little runway for him to land on when he came back to help his PR sort of transition away from being an active astronaut to being a retired astronaut, because that's a much harder thing than you might imagine.
Yes.
When an A-type loses their thing, their shiny ball. So so I was working with him, and one of the things that helped transition him was I wanted people to meet him who had these channels, not just of YouTube, but general art channels, who also could go to the Arctic and do something that was productive being up there, show people what it really was, so people can develop an understanding of what it is, love it, and therefore want to protect it. And he's obviously also deeply invested in ecological matters on Earth, and so this was sort of a twinned thing. And yeah, so these artists, we brought them up, and effectively they give him reputation just by being aboard our adventure. We don't ask them promote him or something like that, but obviously they went to go do this thing because he is the central force that guides it, and in that way it's kind of like marketing. So we were in the Arctic on a ship, essentially putting that on, basically making a large enough artistic splash, online splash, that enough, a couple million people would start paying attention to these places in the Arctic that have never seen an outsider before, at least in such a fashion. Yeah, which was a really fun time. Very cool experience.
Yeah, that no, it certainly sounds like that. And now, when I spoke to you a couple of weeks ago, we had a bit of a chat, and you talked about you and your wife moving to Chile, and then you were just talking now. You have a marketing degree, and you were talking there. You had worked in marketing, and it was sort of not quite so fulfilling, and you were just wanting to head and do something different, and you ended up in Chile.
Yeah, I think everybody who works the corporate life has felt the squeeze of a corporate life, and especially it's a creative industry, so the people who are churning through there are not corporate people for the most part, generally speaking. So I think the burnout rate's probably quite high, but I know that I was burnt out by it very quickly. Just because I suppose it's a transference, because obviously we didn't sell cigarettes, but the concept of selling cigarettes to children is how I view it. Joe Camel, Joe Cool, it's like a Camel cigarettes were a big thing back in the 70s and 80s because they made it illegal to sell cigarettes directly to kids. So they had to come up with a way to do that. Well, I mean, that's a marketing guy, right? Like that's what the job is. You don't choose the client. They just come in and they say, sell cigarettes to kids. And if you're good at the job, that's what you do. And the better you get at that job, I feel like the more guilt you feel doing it, just because even if it's a bar of soap, they didn't want that one. You chose for them. You're really good at, if you're good at that job, you're good at psychology and you're good at human behavior, and you can make them want that bar of soap. And to me, there's a slow degradation of the human spirit when you have to do that every day. So we just looked for a way out of it. Not that I denigrate doing it. I would go back to it if I had to. That is part of life, it's part of society. But at the same time, if and when, right?
So in a way, you listen to an inner sense, an inner voice, your gut, however you want to describe it. So like something stirred within you that wanted you to move on to a different field of employment, and even a different location to base yourself from. Do you recognize how those thoughts came, or did they come to you, or did they come to your wife?
Oh, they came to me for sure. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I'm also kind of, I guess you could call it like a excessive traveler. I don't even know what they call people like me. Someone who's always traveling. Like there isn't a home, there's just traveling. And no desire to settle, really. It's also, I think, a specific personality. Either you're running from or towards, but without a place to stop, you're always running.
We could call you a nomad. A nomad.
Yeah, I suppose, but that implies like you've got a tent, you're setting up places. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll go with nomad for now then.
Yeah, and I do get what you mean, because we're, the commonality, the one place on the planet that you and I have both been at different times is Koshrai Nautilus Resort.
Yes.
And you stayed there for a week or whatever. And I lived there for like 20 odd years. And we occasionally had people come through the doors who I mean, it's a very out of the way place for tourists to travel to. And, we
Absolutely. Yeah.
kind of specialize in scuba diving. So whenever we got scuba divers, they were very experienced. They'd been to a lot of places in the world. So
Hmm.
it was wonderful. I didn't have to babysit any of my customers underwater to keep them safe
Yeah.
because they were highly skilled and they'd been
Yeah.
in many environments around the world and they could handle what was going on. So it was great. But occasionally
Yeah.
we would get someone who was just literally on the island for 2 days because that's when they would have been on the island for half an hour if they could have been, if the
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
flight was that they wanted the stamp in the passport. And we had one quite irate person like that one day from New York who was pissed because he could not buy a coffee cup with Kushrai on it. His daughter collects them, so
That's his whole thing. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
every country he goes to in the world, he brings back a coffee cup to his daughter, and it was
Wow.
like we're just looking at him weird, like, dude, like
But
it was at the point where I nearly had to get out a permanent marker and get one
I
of
was gonna say,
our
do they sell permanent markers? Because
yeah,
you can
and
make a mug pretty
get
quick.
a white coffee cup out of the restaurant and just write Kushrai on
Abs
it and just hand it to him.
Absolutely.
Say,
Yeah.
hey, dude,
$38. Yeah.
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 Yeah, yeah. So, but at least you seem to hang around because you did, a dozen or more. I mean, on the various islands, you went to Chuuk, Pohnpei, Kushrai.
Yeah.
You did a
I'm
dozen or more
definitely, yeah.
videos.
I'm definitely not a numbers checker. Like, I don't know how many countries I've been to. I'm not doing it for the stamp and the passport. It's more like, I don't know, if you look at one of those moths when it's trying to fly, it never seems to go in a straight direction. It's always just circling around, confused. I would describe myself fairly similarly. I'm not aimed towards a thing. When people ask me where I'm going to be in 6 weeks, I don't know. That's just not how I live my life. Um, and so, when you look backwards, you can give things meaning, but looking forwards, I don't ever really know. When you say listen to your gut, I often listen to my gut. Uh, doesn't always steer me right, but it is, it's what I got.
Yeah, fair enough. So, some of the places you travel to, people would consider dangerous. And I'm wondering, like, if you have a perception that sometimes you're heading somewhere dangerous, do you maybe switch your spidey senses on to sort of be a little bit more hyper aware?
For sure. But I think it's almost something that you can't turn off once it is on. It's very, very hard to calm down once you think about certain things. Um, but no, I've been to very dangerous places. Somalia is a very dangerous place. It's got a lot of lovely people. I do not believe that the full media representation of Somalia is an accurate representation of what on the ground life is like. But that said, that does not mean it is a safe place. And it's certainly not a safe place to walk the streets, as me particularly. Um, and so, yeah, that's. I was just in Lebanese prison or jail. I was just in Lebanese jail a few weeks ago.
For
Been to a number
filming
of
or
jails
for because not by
for
choice?
for filming, not by choice, not by choice, for suspicion of being a spy.
Wow.
I was in jail in Cuba for filming Guantanamo Bay. So it's dangerous in a bunch of senses. And I always say that a country is either dangerous based on the people or dangerous based on the government, because both of those can really jam you up and it just depends. Some countries, both of them are safe. Some countries, both of them are dangerous. But you really want to know which one is which. A country like Lebanon, for example, if you're in 85% of Lebanon walking around, it's the safest, nicest place you've ever been in your life. But if you're in 15% of that country, it's a literal war zone in a war. So the juxtaposition of those two things, if you know where not to go, it's a lot safer. And I know I just said that I was in jail, but obviously I'm filming. I have drones and cameras and stuff. I have a much bigger target on me. Going to a dangerous place, I find, is kind of like proving to myself the truth, because so we talked about my father being an astronaut, right? Sometimes the news will get his name wrong, like his first name, and it'll be published in national media. If if they can't get his first name right, a man in their country who's famous in Wikipedia, whatever, how do I trust their information about what's going on in North Syria? I just don't believe it. Like I'm not saying that they're being malicious or this or that. I tried to be a journalist once. They've got 15 minutes for the whole thing, the research, the writing, everything. They're just trying to put it, they're an overworked intern. This isn't some nefarious dude, but at the same time, uh, you end up with some faulty information. When I was in Ethiopia, I met this amazing guy. Now he's a journalist, but he was arrested as a terrorist because he wrote online. Ethiopia is split up in racially based states. So depending on what race you are, you have to live in that state, and you're not allowed to not live there. And people will really mess you up if you leave, like gang life. But they have the capital, Addis Ababa, which is half Oromo, half Amara. And supposedly everybody else lives there too, but really it's kind of like that. And his family is half Oromo and half Amharic. And so the Oromo people are saying, well, we should have Addis Ababa fully be ours. And he wrote on the internet, well, like, then where should I live? Because I'm both of these people. He was an engineer for Ethiopia Airlines, and they put him in prison. They tortured him for almost a full year. He was in jail for years, and they let him out, and he became a journalist. Really, really cool guy. And when I asked him about Ethiopia and what his take was on our Western view of it, he said, it's crazy that you guys think we're in a famine, because the last time Ethiopia was ever brought up in international media was the 1988, I think it's 88, 1980s, We Are the World Live Aid famine. And nobody talked about Ethiopia since then. So every time he meets people from the West, they have this natural perception that they're dealing with someone in a famine, and it drives him insane. And I think that's kind of also why we started the series, is that's the news you get. That's the last time you heard about it. So it makes you feel a certain way about that country. And yes, I'm not saying these countries aren't dangerous. Guatemala City is extremely dangerous. Zona Tres, Zone 3, the filming down there, unbelievably dangerous place to be. But at the same time, that's also like, you want to see those places. And if you don't send anybody to go see them, or if you only ever treat them as this super dangerous place, instead of just going there to get a different story about some totally unrelated thing to the danger of that area that you're filming that story in, you're misrepresenting that place, because we view the fear of it as this foreign person. But even in Zona Tres, one of the most dangerous places I've ever been, possibly the most dangerous square kilometer in the Americas, although I'm not sure, it was at one point. I met a dude there, full gold teeth, big shotgun, defending this gas station. And I used him sort of as like a defensive barrier to launch the drone while I was filming. And I asked him, this is a tough neighborhood, right? And he turns to me and goes, oh, it's not that bad. And that's a guy who lives there. So if you're not taking into account his perception of his home, you're really not describing his home. You're describing what you, the visitor to his home, who is afraid of it, perceives it as. And so when I think about a dangerous country, like, I try to ignore it, because that's not really the point. I do pay attention when I'm filming in the street. I mean, you're carrying around a $10,000 camera and everybody is looking at you all the time. So you do have to look for the guy who's looking with intent. But at the same time, you also, I don't want to disrespect those places by treating them like violence when 95% of the people are not engaged in violence. Especially a place like Somalia, that you have never heard a positive story from Somalia. It just doesn't exist. Nobody talks about it. But there's 95% of that country still good people. The 5% are rough and they are acting horribly, but those other 95% are just walking the street. So to me, it's important that somebody goes there and says that and sees it and proves it. Because if it wasn't true, I would not say that. I'm not trying to make Somalia into some Disneyland. But
no, I know what you mean about the media. We started to learn that when we did the raffle. We had a film crew from Australia fly in for 2 days and interview my wife and I. And through that process, having dinner with the journalist and the cameraman, and we were talking to him about this and that. We said, look, so far, like, the raffle's been misrepresented a bit in this particular way, which was actually exaggerating. They were telling people win the whole island. And we're like, but you can't. And the journalist, she just explained it to me pretty quick. Like, Doug, we got 4 seconds. Like, it's got to be a smashing story, big headline, or no one's going to watch it, And part of the reason why I'm doing the podcast, to try and educate men on the reasons why they should develop their intuition and then how to do it, is for the things you're talking about, is for the personal discernment. So that when we are watching mainstream media, social media, etc., because we're absolutely bombarded with information, it's
Mm-hmm.
so that we can discern a little bit better. It's like we turn our spidey senses on a little bit more, not on high alert all the time, that's for sure, but we're just able to realize that that story's probably 90% true, and that
Yeah.
story's probably 20% true, or whatever. So what, and some of it's based on perception, but it's, where am I going to put my faith? What am I going to follow? Where am I, you might, for your next story, you might see something that says, Somalia is a terrible place, da, 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 and it might spark in you, well, hang on, it can't be 100% bad, just like you
Yeah.
said. I
Yeah.
And now that motivates you to go there and find some good and try and find out what portion of the country's normal and
Mm-hmm.
portray it. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's yeah. So I guess that's the angle I come from with the whole
Yeah,
intuition thing, man.
when you say intuition, the way that I hear it is, so I did about 25 jobs over the course of my life, various jobs, anything I could, because I always wanted to travel and it's very expensive. And so my system was just move somewhere for 3 to 6 months, work illegally at some, dishwashing or this or whatever it could be, selling candy, running a CD stand, whatever was available, working on a farm, teaching English, whatever you could. And doing 25 plus jobs before you're 30, I think also gives you a ton of perspective on what reality is like. When you're a kid, you think everybody's doing their job, they know what they're doing. And then you get into the working world, and it's like none of these people have any idea what's going on. Maybe if you're lucky, 1 in 10 people in the room like has a good grasp of what's happening. Everyone else is just trying to get through the day. And experiencing that firsthand in a bunch of different industries, I think gave me a lot of perspective towards, this intuition, if you'll call it that, gut feeling, decision making, because I think I became a little bit more confident in my own skills just because nobody else seemed to have them. And it's like, well, if these guys are all doing okay, excuse me, I'll probably be doing okay. So I shouldn't stress too hard. And then once you get like your 12th, 15th, 20th job, it's like I could get another job. Like I'm certain. If I lose this job, it really is not the end of the world. I have done it before. I've done it so many times now that I'll just find something, whatever it might be. And that also gives you this level of confidence that now you start giving yourself the allowance to trust your own decisions, because if it messes up, it really is not that big of a deal, especially in your 20s. My God, people will just forgive you. It's like, you made a mistake, but that's how you do it. And so I think that having those things really, really helped. Also, I effectively moved out of my family home when I was 13. And so since I have been living on my own, or I suppose with my own guardianship, for such a long time, especially before other people, I think that also kind of developed me into a decision-making personality, because especially when you're young, if you have to manage your own life, it sort of becomes second nature,
Mm.
and you stop really relying on, your parents to tell you what to do with the day. They're just not there. So for me, that was also quite formative. Yeah.
So
And oh, sorry, please.
no, you keep going.
I was just going to say the job is an extension of that. Doing the YouTube stuff just allows you to follow those whims so directly, because you have an idea, you meet somebody, and you're like, oh, you're a story. I can see the narrative cascading behind you. But, I went back to Okinawa, an island off the coast of Japan. Well, really sort of off the coast of Taiwan. And I'd been there when I was 17 to teach English. And I'd met a dude there, really nice guy. We'd share an apartment for a couple of months, and then we just lost touch until my mid-30s. And I went back to Okinawa, and I met him there. And he has changed dramatically, night and day. Totally different guy. Now he's in this cyberpunk band, which is like a form of death metal. I don't really understand. And it's awesome. He's having this great life. Like, he's learned himself, but he's totally different, a complete yin yang swap from the man that I knew whenever I lived there. And I thought that was really cool. So I made a video about that. It's about his metal band, but really it's about coming to terms with this idea that there's growth, that the way I described it is that you're living on the shoulders, not of giants, but on corpses of your dead self. You're just piling up all these people who you thought you'd be when you're building up this future version in your head of what you might be. And then you don't become that. You become this other thing that you intended not to. And then you slowly build up this corpse pile until you're a guy standing on top of all of them. And there, your intuition. There, every one of them learned a thing. And every one of them, maybe they learned it the hard way or whatever, but they all know something. And so all of those corpses below you that form that little pyramid that you're perched upon, that gives you the driving capacity to make decisions. And if you never really do anything, you'll never develop that pile, and then you just can't make those decisions. And so to me, it's more like, that's a lot of the reason I travel. It's a lot of the reason I had a bunch of jobs. It's a lot of the reason why I don't like to plan things, is because I find it's easier to have those types of experiences that form that hill below me, if you will, if I keep that sort of open mind and lifestyle, which obviously wouldn't work for everybody, but sort of worked my way into this.
So when you're in Japan, and this will seem an unusual question, is that where you found Jesus?
I found a fake Jesus in Japan, for sure.
Yeah, I watched that video yesterday.
And also, coincidentally, just a few hundred meters from that Jesus, there is a pyramid of Giza, also in Japan, found by the same man, a man who spoke to UFOs live on TV back in the 70s. I'm not sure that he was 100% truthful about any of those three things.
Maybe
yeah, I mean,
it was his perception, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But that's sort of a good example of what I was talking about, is that that was my original season when I didn't know what I was doing, and my cameraman and I were just wandering around Japan looking for ideas, and I came across that fake grave of Jesus, and then you just work backwards from that. Like, that's a story, but what story is it? And I would tell it differently now, 6 years into the job. How I have a different style now and I understand the job a bit more, but back then I was just thinking that's a very funny thing. But it's also, when you break it down, extremely similar to Mormonism. And I didn't know how much back then. Now I would have framed it much differently, but back then I was like, well, I don't know, maybe people are going to get very upset about that if I frame it in that way. But it was just, if you just said Joseph Smith, it would have sounded very, very similar in terms of the stories being told. And you could sort of see where this guy got his inspiration for the story that he was telling. Just kind of funny.
Yeah.
But it's also like every country has those. And that was also kind of a thing I wanted to show, is like conspiracy theorists exist in every country and they kind of have similar threads they follow, which is funny to me anyway. So she has to listen to it hundreds of times. It's also in her head.
I did it. So you do
just stuck in.
Do you write a script, or you put a script in your head before you start talking?
Depends. It depends on the situation. Sometimes you don't have time to write it, so you have to come up with something off the top of your head. Other time, and in the very beginning, I didn't do any scripting at all because I wanted it to sound like I was just talking, and then eventually I realized that that's just not tenable. Actually, I was filming at Lucky Dragon number 7, which is a Japanese fishing vessel that was nuked by the American military accidentally during their tests in Bikini Atoll back in the 50s.
Yep.
And so it was this huge deal in Japan because they got nuked again. Like, it was like a big deal to them because that was like a big trauma, and it came back. And so Godzilla is sort of based on that experience. The opening scene of the original Godzilla is that ship getting nuclear attacked.
Oh, really?
And then Godzilla is this manifestation of the nuclear age and the nuclear attack on Japan, destroying their cities. And it's sort of a story about like what Godzilla really means. But yeah, so I was trying to film that, and they still have this ship in Tokyo. I believe it's Tokyo, yeah. I believe it's Tokyo, yeah. In South Tokyo, they still have this ship. So I went go film there, and I was walking around and I was trying to do the episode, and it's naturally just like, any country, this is where they take the field trip for the kids. So every 8 minutes, you'd get a new 300 elementary school age children come flooding through. And if you are trying to do a full 12-minute or whatever walk through filming, having an 8-minute child countdown time, like, it's impossible. You just can't do it. And you will get so frustrated with yourself attempting over and over to restart this when the children go away. And yeah, so after that, we were just like, all right, we got to write these scripts and we got to cut it down into sections so that we don't end up doing these, because you just can't film 12 minutes in public without something going wrong.
Yeah. So you'd film like a minute at a time now.
It entirely depends on what I can get away with.
Yeah.
If I'm in the countryside of Ethiopia, I can do 4 minutes or whatever if I have to. But downtown somewhere, walking the street, people just mess with you. People will mess with the camera. People will try to interrupt the shot. You're never going to get it, and then you'll get frustrated. And filming yourself is very frustrating, very, very frustrating, because you hate yourself naturally when you see yourself on camera. When you make that mistake and, whatever it is, for some reason, it's way more heightened when you're being filmed and it's all kind of on you. And you're reading big sections of a script, 16, 17 sentences that you have to memorize 14, 15 seconds before you say them, and then just hope that they flow out of you until they eventually do. Well, it's its own little challenge.
It's quite a skill. So taking dangerous places out of the answer for this question, what's maybe one or two of the most unusual, and that's a very open, to your interpretation, unusual places you visited that, or where's somewhere you went that you thought this might be okay, and you got there and you were so happy you went there? Like
Easter Island is incredible. Rapa Nui, they'd call it. You think that it's just the moai, the big carvings, the big rock stone men carvings. People call them heads, but they're obviously full bodies. Those are cool, but there's just something about the whole place that's really cool. The Pinochet dictatorship, it's part of Chile. So the Pinochet dictatorship ruled it back in the 70s, and they turned it all into this big sheep farm. So it's been delineated with these big rock walls, kind of like you'd see in Scotland, I suppose, or the Azores. Big delineated national park. But then he forced everybody to live in this one little town, this Hangaroa pocket, where everybody lives to this day, and they're not allowed to not live there. So it's really like 95% national park, very beautiful island, not a big island. You could bicycle around it in a day pretty reasonably. Not a huge island, but beautiful, windswept, got a lot going on. And then all this history that you can just sort of sense, because there's these moai just falling over in the field over there. And you can sense a lot to it. I really enjoyed it there. The food was really good. It was surprisingly cheap. I really liked Easter Island. I went back a year later. When I started this series, I hadn't gone there. And the moment I started the series, the first place we went was Easter Island, because I'd met a chef there who I thought was so fascinating that I just wanted to go back and film him. He was one of the inspirations for starting the series. But yeah, really cool place. There's been a lot of cool places, though. I think that all around the world, it just depends on what you want in that moment, and also what your tolerance is of grime, what your tolerance is of dirt, poverty, what your tolerance is of a variety of things. Again, not talking danger, but danger is another one of those. All of those things disallow certain places and make them less enjoyable. If you turn those senses off, sometimes places can be very fun. I had a great time in Guatemala. I think it's a fantastic country. But at the same time, there's parts of Guatemala that I consider the most dangerous places I've ever been to. The Philippines has the most beautiful landscape you'll ever see, but everything humans do there is atrocious, just giant garbage piles of humanity. which ruins it. And that makes it very difficult. Kashrai was incredible. I really thought Kashrai was quite nice. Micronesia in general is very interesting, very nice place. Again, nobody's going there. Nobody's been to Kashrai. They don't know it's nice, but it also makes it feel like people want to talk to you there. They want to get to know you. If you really like that small town feel, it's a great place to go. If you like anonymity, not a great place to go. You know, you're making friends within the first 24 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, if Koshrai had 10,000 tourists a year, it would be an incredibly different place. Like it would be,
For sure.
yeah,
For sure.
yeah, some of the things that we like about it would definitely go. I'm curious now too, and I know when we talked a few weeks ago, you said you're not big on numbers and things like that. You just like doing what you're doing. But I'm also curious, have there been any of your episodes you've put out that you thought, oh, this is a nice episode, boom, and put it out, and it's had an unusually high amount of views, and you've wondered why?
I almost argue it's the opposite. If you really like a video and you put a lot of effort into it, that one's going to do the worst. That's
Yeah.
just how it is. That's part of the game. And again, it goes back to, you were talking about earlier, the news has that like 4 seconds. They were competing with 4 other news channels. I'm competing with hundreds of an infinite amount of content at your fingertips. And much of it is prompted to you on the side, just in case I ever lose your interest for 1 second, just click on something else, right? So the competition is very strong. And when I make a video, usually that I love, it's because there was a huge emotional weight to it. And people don't really want to watch huge emotional weight all the time. And some people love it, but the algorithm doesn't, because the average person doesn't love it. And if the algorithm was written in a way where it's like, it's either a 5 out of 5 star or a 0 out of 5 star. If it just found who were 5 out of 5 and fed it to them, I think it would do great. But because the average person would view it as, like, for example, I went to a Syrian refugee camp and did an entire video on this boy I met who I couldn't save him. So I just asked him what he wanted, and he wanted a little piano. So I bought him a piano, but my sister was there to do this big work with the UN to basically look into how all of the charities that work there are spending their money and make sure that it's effective, et cetera, et cetera. And so my whole video is basically about how me buying him the piano feels great, but it doesn't really help anything overall. He's still stuck in the camp with a piano now, and it makes the camp a little bit nicer, but what she's doing solves the camp's issues. But nobody really praises her for it, and she never meets the kids. She just looks at numbers on this spreadsheet, and I have to go, I go in there and I meet this kid. And it really emotionally affected me meeting this kid. I mean, he's a Syrian refugee living in a camp for the last 11 years. His entire life has been in this camp. And it's not that it's hell on earth or anything, but your and my life experience is so dramatically different from his that you just, and you see yourself in the kid and you want to help the kid. He's you can sense him. He's got similarities, and you can't help him. You just can't. And that's a microcosm. So you make a video like that, it's depressing, it's painful, but it's very true. It's an honest reflection of how we're dealing with refugee crisis, which is an honest crisis. And you can not look away at it, you can look away at it, whatever. Some people love to look at it, and I'm one of those people. Other people cannot stand looking at it, and that is the masses of the algorithm. And I'm not blaming them for that. I know the sun's there, but I don't need to stare at it, right? It doesn't benefit me. But I am that person, so I make that type of video. And when I make a video that's just pulp, that's obviously meant to feed the algorithm, it gets millions of views. I'm certain that if I wanted to, I could have a much, much more financially successful channel, viewer-wise. I could have many more viewers. I just don't know if it would be what I really got into this for, and therefore if it might just kill the whole point of doing it anyway. I get enough.
So just what you said just then, the whole point of why I got into this, and you've sort of like, you've alluded to it through, but if I asked you, why did you get into this? what's the immediate answer there?
I'd say that the world climate has changed, not like the temperature, but the way that we view each other. We went through a period of openness, of trade, of, they call it globalism now, but just the idea that countries could be friends and trade and lessen wars through that trade and that economic synchronicity, and how we could effectively try to stop World War III from happening. And then in the last couple of years, through what I believe to be deep ignorance, we've just pretended like none of that's real and none of it matters, and we can just toss it away. That you can shut your borders and we can still have avocados. That none of this stuff is not integrated. Like your chocolate bar doesn't come from Ontario. So if you're sitting in Ontario and you're eating chocolate, you really need to understand how the world works. And it just really felt like people were forgetting that all of that is necessary, that you can't just turn off the tap and keep the water running. And I just wanted people to have some brutal reminders of what this all really is, because the world is not clean because your house is clean. The systems are not pure because you want them to be. You have to look at them. You gotta stare at the sun, as I say. And so somebody's got to do that. I'm not saying everybody has to do it. You don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to do it about every single thing. But if everybody just chose one thing to focus on like that, I think we'd have a lot more understanding of how the world works. And I think if people had a little more empathy towards the fact that everybody's just a dude trying to get through the day, we'd have a better world. But I'm also not a utopianist. I don't believe that the world is some amazing place, that it's better over there because they've got family or, God knows what. I think that everybody's just a person trying to figure it out, and they've got their cultural umbrella over top of them that sort of gives them guidelines towards how they're probably going to act. But for the most part, you're just, a hominin trying to make it through the day. You're just one of the successful apes. And I think that that's depressing for some people, but to me, it's a very, very freeing thought. We're all just people. When you look at a deer, you don't have these wild expectations for how they're going to act. Again, going back to how I was raised, there's no mountain above a deer being like, oh, your father was a great elk or whatever. No, you're just a deer. You're just trying to be a deer, trying not to get eaten. And a lot of this world is just trying to be a deer, trying not to get eaten. When I was in Lebanon, I thought that was the coolest part. And it made me realize I really like people who don't expect a future. They live right now. And Lebanon people have had so much war, so much difficulty, especially with the big explosion in the harbor recently, just so much uncertainty. They're currently suffering the worst economic collapse ever recorded. You would imagine there'd be crime. You'd imagine there'd be unrest. You'd imagine it'd be unsafe to go visit. It's completely safe. People are absolutely as friendly as they come, just because, just build up these expectations, and it's just not how life is. And people are people everywhere. You always imagine your neighborhood's the safe one, everybody else's is the bad one. But I don't know, I just kind of wanted all of that to be summarized, and it's very hard to get that emotion to people that you're over there in Australia, I'm over here in Canada, everybody's just living. That's how I feel about everywhere.
And so we can expect some Lebanon content soon on the channel?
Yes, so I'm doing Greece right now. I've got I think 5 more Greek videos because I was in Crete, and then I'm moving on to Lebanon after that, and then maybe Europe or Japan. I have a bunch of backlogged content I haven't actually edited yet, but I'll get around to it.
Yeah, cool.
Lebanon, I want to get out just because I just experienced it, so it's very fresh in my mind, and being arrested as a potential Israeli spy was quite memorable for me. So I'd like to tell that story as soon as possible.
Yeah. And I remember when I first contacted you about having this chat, you were there and you'd mentioned that the government was providing 1 hour of electricity a day. And then after that, people were relying on generators. And yeah, I mean, like you're in Canada, I'm in Australia, but we've both got reliable electricity 99.9% of the time. And you take that, like last Christmas night, just got, 5 months ago, we lost power for 6 days with storms here, and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
threw us out. My neighbor had, we're on acreage. I was at my neighbor's place yesterday, and he was showing me his brand new solar battery system, like so
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and I've got like a big solar system, but I don't have batteries. So we're about to invest into that as well. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, this is not good, but these people live with this every day.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And yet you never know, because when you walk the streets, it kind of feels like Europe. It doesn't, you
Mm,
feel it looks European. I mean, other than the trash and street destruction, but a lot of that just has to do with the harbor explosion. The people have a very European lifestyle and culture and attitude. So you don't really, it just feels odd that things are so collapsed. And yet, you never, when you talk to people, every single person I spoke to was so friendly, including they're not even police, the FBI, who were interrogating me, thinking that I was this Israeli spy. When they finally did let me out, their number one concern was that I would blame Lebanon and not have had a good vacation there. That was what they were completely, and not a fake concern. That was their genuine concern. They were like, man, now that this has happened to you, you're going to go home and be like, Lebanon was bad. I was like, no, it was great. Like this happens. Like, you guys are in a war. I carry a lot of filming equipment. I can understand why people might misunderstand my intentions. But that describes Lebanon better than anything, is that the FBI, when arresting me for this thing that they consider a terrible crime, that was their big concern. It's, oh man, he's not going to like Lebanon.
wow. Yeah.
Not everywhere's like that, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, people, they have that trope of people invite you into their house for food or whatever. That's how it is. People do. We walk the streets of Sidon or Sida, depending on how you call it, and it's considered one of the less safe cities. It's a fully Muslim city, which in Lebanon you have the split Christian, Sunni, and Shia factions. So it's got a lot of Syrian refugees. Lebanon has 4 million people and 2 million Syrian refugees. So they have this serious problem with that as well.
Wow.
So there's a ton of Syrians inside it. It's considered an unsafe city. My wife and I walked around there, and people were like bending over themselves to give us gifts, invite us into their house. Thousands of people, not exaggerating, stopping in the street to come over and just be nice, and not fake nice, not I call it the white rhino, not where you're so uncommon in that area that they just want to come and touch your weird skin. No, but like genuinely nice people who wanted you to enjoy their city. And because of the war, they haven't had tourists in so long that they're just excited, oh my God, you're back. And they all want you to have a good time. And yeah, so I just want people to see that side of it as well, within the framework of everything else that it is, because those other things aren't untrue. They taint your vision of what the whole picture is of a country. And I don't know, it's also my love. It's my passion. I did this before I had a camera. So just adding the camera was more of a risk about financial decisions, because it's expensive to do this and cost of production is quite high. Even with YouTube, obviously it's extremely low compared to making an actual documentary. But for a guy just paying for it himself, it's very expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're able to now travel anyway, film it, and put your emotion into it, and have other people experience the emotion you experienced
Yeah,
on that visit. Yeah. Yeah.
and I get to tell my honest truth. I don't have to hold back. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's fine. People forgive me, and I've gotten over that over the years. I don't have a boss, and because the algorithm and I'm not trying to please it. I just get to say what I want, and that's been very, very liberating. Because there's some things you want to complain about, some things you want to praise that you otherwise wouldn't. People. We got offers from bigger networks to put the show on those networks, and to me, it was just like, well, but you're not going to let me make this show though. If I go on your network, it's going to have to change to fit your network, and then it's just not this. And I'm not saying it wouldn't be better. It might get more views, might make more money, but I wouldn't enjoy it. And I know I'd stop doing it pretty quickly once I don't enjoy it anymore, because I didn't get into it for the money. That's for sure. Could have stuck in
Yeah.
marketing. It's a much more lucrative career.
Yeah. So the name Rare Earth, where did that come from? Does it have any meaning, or just what hit you at the time?
My wife came up with it. She always comes up with our names. She's very good at that. Uh, but it's just because we go to particularly rare places. And it was my father's channel. Well, say my father's channel. It was my channel for my father when he was an astronaut. So we had, I'd say about 10% of our current followers came from his channel originally. So they would have had an expectation sort of astronaut content, but he never made anything. We didn't use the channel once he got back from space. We just built the channel so we could put out the space oddity video. And once he got back and we didn't use it, we developed this show to sort of fill that void. It was like, what do you do with those 100-something thousand followers you got? And so we built the show around that. So I'd say 10% of those guys, but also when I first started it, 100% of the guys would have expected space content. So Rare Earth is just to say, hey, we're taking you away from space content, moving it back down to the planet. I did the opening video with my father to basically just let people know this is no longer a space channel. It never really was a space channel. It was my video dump that I could put my father's stuff on that I made, but they don't know that, obviously. As a viewer, it's just jarring to sign up for something that has him and then bait and switched to me.
Yeah. And I did notice you tried to do living in space on Earth, some videos.
Oh, did I lose you there? I lost you for a second, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, I did notice that you did some space videos on Earth just to show people what it was like. Was that you in the astronaut costume on the skateboard?
No, I executive produced that. I don't normally like to be in front of the camera, if I'm being honest with you. I only do that out of pure necessity. I much prefer being the puppet master, if you will, behind the scenes. Being on camera is very frustrating. I find it, me personally, anyway.
Yeah. So you just got a hired actor who could skateboard.
Yeah, so that was there's another author who works for my father's publishing house in Canada whose son does promo videos for new authors in Canada, and I gave him the outline of what we wanted to make, and he and his team put it together with my oversight. And it actually, that is the most successful book advertisement in my country's history.
Really?
So it's yeah. So that was kind of fun.
Good.
Yeah. That was so long ago. It feels like a lifetime ago, just because that was before Rare Earth, and so many things have happened on the road with the show that it almost feels like a different person back then.
Yeah. I've got that. I've talk about things in the past, like even Kushrai, even though it was, I left there at the end of 2016, which really isn't that long ago. It does seem to seem now like a previous lifetime, simply because since then, moving back to Australia, my life has changed so much that it just,
exactly.
I get what you mean, and, like I'm now 60. When I was 19, I became a professional firefighter. That to me now seems like multiple lifetimes ago. It's
sure.
there. And at the moment, I do a couple of days a week. I do fire safety training, for a private company. I go around, to industry and do it. And it just flows out of me and I love it. And I have a great time teaching it. But me being on the big red truck, zooming down the street to an emergency, that was just like forever ago. Anyway.
Yeah, even a couple of years can feel like a lifetime ago if you have that shift in what you do now and how things are. It's one of my main reasons for moving. I used to say back when I was in my early 20s, and I moved a lot more, that you should only stay place either 5 months or until you don't want to just go and see it anymore. Because whenever I'd move to a new city, my way of traveling is, I think, a little bit different. I'll choose a city that's a pretty good hub in a region, let's say Osaka, and you move there for 5 or 6 months, and then you can go see the surrounding area fairly easy just from that hub. You're not traveling per se. You're working, but you got your weekends and you got your afternoons and those things. And my thought is, the moment that you don't want to just get on the subway and go to a random station and be like, what is over here? You should probably leave, because now you're falling into a routine and you don't really like it anymore, and you're not paying attention. It's no longer exciting. In one of my videos, I use this exact example, but a thing I've said probably 1,000 times in real life to people when advising mentees and things like that is, I used to teach kindergarten in Japan back when I was 17. And I was teaching this kid, 3-year-old kid, Kazuki, called himself Kazuchis because he sounded like a mouse. And this little 3-year-old kid, in Japan, they have to clean the floors, the 3-year-olds, after the school day. They're very industrious children. But so this kid he's got his butt in the air doing that human triangle with his arms on a rag, running forward, cleaning the floor back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And he's got his tongue out and he sticks it behind the rag and just licks like a full run along the floor. And I'm 17. I am his teacher, but I'm also 17. So it's just funny, right? Like it's a little kid licking the whole floor. So I'm just letting him do it and watching him. And eventually, he's done the whole floor, he's licked it and all that. And so I ask him, I say, in Japanese, I said, Kazuki, like, why'd you lick the floor? And he goes, well, I didn't know what it tasted like. And I thought that like, honestly, that was brilliant. Like, it's the perfect response because he's dead right. He's dead right. There's nothing I can say to that where he's not right. He didn't know what it tasted like. And of the two of us in that room, he is the only one of us who knows what it tasted like. And I know that it wasn't good. But from an information standpoint, Kazuki's got one over on me because he licked the floor. And so there's a lot of stuff I say in life. I might have lost you again. I'm worried I'm losing the audio there. Sorry. Yeah. So there's a lot of things in life where like with Kazuki, it might not taste great and it's not going to, but if you actually want to know what that's like, you just have to do it. And that's sort of what I mean by licking the floor is I went to Somalia, not because I thought it would be Club Med. I didn't have expectations it was going to be great. I knew I'd meet some good people. I knew that there would be stuff there that wasn't my expectation, but my wife was assaulted in the street. I did all sorts of female genital mutilation work, which is disgusting to witness in person. I was multiple times assaulted, almost killed, all sorts of things, had to bribe the police with drugs, all sorts of things happen. But all of those are the licking of the floor. The floor tastes bad. But of every single person I know on this planet except my wife, I'm the only one who knows what Somali is like, other than the Somali people I meet. None of them have been. They don't know. And they have to rely on my information, and I don't have to rely on theirs because they've never been. They cannot tell me what it's like. I know what it's like. That floor tasted disgusting, but I know, and so that's sort of a life philosophy of mine is Kazuki was right. I don't want to lick every floor, but if I want to know what that floor is like, I have to accept that that's gross. You got to lick it.
Yeah, he may have a business now where he's able to tell people what their floor tastes like. He might run around doing that. Yeah,
well,
wow.
Oh my God. What's crazy is I'm so old now. That guy's got to be like 25 years old at this point.
Yeah,
But,
yeah. I was thinking that. I can picture this guy. I'm thinking he's in his 20s now.
Yeah.
He's
Oh, yeah.
probably,
And he has no idea he did that, right? Because this happened when he was 3 years old.
he's going to
Only
listen to
one
this
person
video.
knows. Yeah.
He is going to listen to this video and
I
he's
hope
going to be
somebody
like,
sends it
what?
to him.
Yeah, we might.
Kazuki of Naha, Okinawa, if you are listening,
Wow.
you used to lick the floor, and it was
He,
very funny.
you might have to pay for his therapy when he hears this.
That was funny times, though. Yeah, hiring a 17-year-old to be a teacher is funny. The 17-year-old has no awareness,
And
but
you
they know
spoke
just enough.
Japanese? You spoke Japanese,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, so I pick it up. I pick up language pretty quick, and I started learning Japanese a few months before I left. And then once you're in a 3-year-old's classroom and they're all talking to you, like if a 3-year-old girl says "oshikoshitai," and you don't know what that means, when she starts peeing, you'll figure out that meant I have to go pee. Right? It clicks pretty quick.
Yeah.
Because they're 3, so they're only saying stuff like a 3-year-old. But what's funny about that is, right, so I learned Japanese teaching these children in kindergarten, and I had no idea, like it just didn't occur to me that I was speaking like a child, because like it's translated to Japanese, so you don't put it together that I have a boo-boo on my tum-tum or whatever, right? Like that's something that you would never, that a child would say, and you would just never pick up on because you don't know Japanese, that boo-boo is not the right word for an adult to be saying, and that, uh, yeah, so that was funny. So for the first, I'd say, year of me speaking Japanese, I had no idea, but I'm certain I was lacing it with all sorts of very young children's words.
Were you getting funny looks?
Oh, all the time, but that's just because I was a foreigner.
Yeah.
I'm sure that didn't help. But
But they're so obliging and polite, the Japanese, that they probably just inside they were laughing, rolling on the floor, but out externally they
absolutely.
were just bowing and
Once you
graciously.
learn, once you learn Japanese, then it's different because you can hear them talking publicly. They won't do it to your face in English, but like if you got two teens on the subway looking at you chatting, they're talking about you.
Yeah,
And you pick that up all the time because they never expect you to speak Japanese. So when they're talking about you, you can just turn over and be like, I understand, right? And then you get this whole kerfuffle of apology, and it's always fun.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, no, I learned Japanese just because I was drunk one night in Russia. I was living on a military base in Russia in my teens, and my friend was visiting me, and we were very, very drunk. And I said, I'm going to move to Japan after high school. And he said, No, you're not. And for whatever reason, that offended me so deeply. I just decided, no matter what, all the consequences aside, I'm going to go live in Japan after high school. I didn't know anything about the country. I didn't really care about it. I'm not one of those people who loves anime and
Hmm.
Japanophiles, as I think of them. He told me I wasn't going to do it, and that kind of pissed me off.
Yeah, so
So
you're going to
that's,
do it.
I
Yeah,
have to do it.
yeah. And it's funny you're saying being on the subway, and people didn't realize you could speak Japanese. And Japanese is a
Mm-hmm.
very popular language. Like in the schools in Australia here, they teach it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
in Kashrai, the small population over there, and
Yeah.
it's a radically different language to Pohnpei, Chuk, or the Marshall Islands. It's there's only 5,000 people live on the island. There's probably another 5,000 Koshraians in America. So there's 10,000 people on the planet today speak that language.
Yeah.
And going back 25 years ago, we had an American friend who lived on the island, and she dedicated herself to learning the language. And she was sitting in Honolulu Airport one day in the departure lounge, and there was two Kosraean ladies returning from Hawaii or the US back to Kosrae to
Mm-hmm.
visit family. And they're talking away, like talking up a storm, and she's sitting right beside them in Kosraean,
Yeah.
and they think no one else in that
Well, of
room
course. Yeah. How
because
could
like
you? Yeah.
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 And she's
Yeah.
just sitting there,
So
and
obscure. Yeah.
she's just picking up every word of it. And after about 15 minutes, she just turned to them and spoke in fluent Kosraean, and they were horrified because they're trying
Uh,
to like suddenly think, what were we saying?
what did we say? Yeah.
And they weren't being
Absolutely.
offensive to anything because they're not, but
Yeah.
it's just like they thought they were like on it, like literally on an island,
Yeah.
just two people. No one has a clue. And
Oh, for
yeah,
sure.
she did it. She was a very nice lady. She did it to like surprise them, but
Yeah. 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 That's
she
fun.
wanted to let
Yeah.
them
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
that
Of
she
course.
knew the language too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife's born in Hungary, and she also speaks rudimentary Japanese. So whenever we're in public and we want to say something that you just can't say, I mean, we both speak German also, but German's a much more English sounding language. You
Hmm.
can't be speaking in German and expect it to be secret. But if you speak in Japanese, especially if you use like alternative words rather than the exact number one mainstream word, chances are, even those people, you could study Japanese 7 years in your home country in school, and you're really not going to speak Japanese. You have to be there. It has to be immersive. It's such a
Yes.
complicated language.
Yeah.
And just like English, like probably every language, it's so much slang that learning the dictionary definitions, if you went and sat down and listened to a conversation, it's going to be really difficult for you to understand what's going on. And that's my wife and my split, is that I'm really bad at book learning. I just go out and I talk to people, and she really doesn't like chatting. She just likes studying. And so she knows all the vocabulary, but she can't talk to people with it because she can't put together the sentences. Even though she knows how, she doesn't have this practical, I guess, muscle memory in the brain of putting those sentences together. Whereas me, I mess up the vocabulary all the time, but I can flow the sentences out just because I've put together those patterns in conversation, and I don't care if I'm wrong. If they figure it out, that's close enough for me.
Yeah.
And learning Japanese was fun. Learning German's also fun because you can do it in like 6 months. If you speak English, German is so easy. Just every word is like you're making fun of a German.
I did.
Just take the English word and Germanify it.
Yeah, in the 8th grade at school, we did German for the year, and so I had that. And then we went to Italy, and I learned a bit of Italian. But when we went to France, we just could not grasp it at all. Like the French language. And unfortunately, to me, if there's one place that you're going to visit, like a tourist place, where they really want you to speak their language, it's France.
For sure.
Like they kind of don't appreciate if you're not even attempting. And we just, and the Italians out in the countryside that spoke no English, my very poor Italian and the small amount I knew, it brought a smile to their face, like because of putting it. But in France, I couldn't even try in France. It just didn't compute, And,
it's even worse in fake France in Luxembourg. The Luxembourgish just, if you're speaking bad French or no French, they're just so mad at you. The moment you step into the place, they're just offended. I really don't like that country, but it's awesome.
Yeah, actually, interesting. You're saying your wife's originally from Hungary. We're in August, we're heading over there. We'll be in Budapest for a week, and then taking a river cruise up to Amsterdam and stuff. Great. So it's our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, right on. Yeah.
So we're doing a 5-week European vacation. So,
no, that's great. That's a beautiful spot too, up the Danube, up from Hungary going north is really nice. I've lived on 3 different spots on it going north there. Really, really nice.
Yeah.
No, I'd like to live in Europe again, but right now I've got a house here in Canada that I live in the summer, and I can't live in it in the winter because it's on an island that freezes over. So I need to live somewhere else for the winter. And right now, my wife and my big lifetime question is, what are we going to do? Because we normally film over those winter months just to do something. Like, for example, I was in Greece and Lebanon this last year, Ireland, Greece, and Lebanon filming, just to waste those months. But it's very expensive when you travel for 3-4 months of the year plus. So we're trying to find some other spot to move to. And my wife being European, her family being over in Europe, we thought about there, but moving to Europe for the winter just seems like the wrong direction to be going.
Well, and I mean, I know the Canadian dollar and the Australian dollar are probably fairly similar in value. And you start traveling to Europe, like for us, we've literally got everything's double the price, just with the exchange rate, and that sort of thing. So it's
for sure.
If
I were being paid in euro, that would be one thing, but I am most certainly not.
I get that.
And it's not like, I don't want to complain too much about getting to travel around the whole world, though. It's pretty all right. It's just a YouTube job is much more labor intensive than I think people give it credit for. It's not a 9 to 5. It's your whole life. It's your personality. It's everything you do. You have to wake up doing it. You have to be on call every single moment of every single day. And so because of that, it's a lifestyle.
I
would
get
recommend people.
When we had the resort, because it was a hotel where people could sleep, eat, and we offered tourist activities, scuba diving, etc. Whenever we went anywhere, we were staying in a hotel, eating in a restaurant, doing activities. And I've done over 2,000 scuba dives, but I've only done about 8 of those dives not on Koshrai, because it's always worked for me. And the couple of times I went and dived elsewhere, all I was doing was looking at how they were operating for good and bad things, And then every time we used to stay in a hotel room or eat in a restaurant, we would be taking photos of restaurant menus. It was just annoying. You couldn't sit and enjoy and relax. We lived it. And when we traveled away, if we were in Europe or Thailand or wherever we were on vacation, I'm constantly, multiple times a day, checking emails in case we've got someone who wants to come and stay for a week or two and dive, and they've got odd questions, and I don't want to lose them
Hmm.
because that's my
Yeah.
cream, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I get that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
for me, it's also the same, watching media, watching documentaries. I know how they're made now. Watching the news, I understand how it's being made, and it really makes me distrust it and dislike it a lot more.
Mm,
I got in an argument with someone in Chook, this American woman, who was mad at me because I don't do interviews. And I said to her, the reason I don't do interviews is because this is my opinion and I edit the video. I created the narrative and then I'm placing someone's interview inside a narrative I created. In a way, to me, that's deceptive because what I've done is I've hidden what is clearly still my opinion behind
mm,
this man's message. Sure, I got him to say it, but I can get you to say stuff. I can ask you leading questions that get
mm,
you towards what I want. And that's what you have to do if you're interviewing someone and you want to make a story. Editing an interview is a huge pain.
mm.
Editing an interview, a 2 hour interview, hour and a half interview, trying to get that down to a 4 minute soundbite or something is days of work. And so to make that way easier, what you end up doing is you plan in advance what you want them to say, and then you ask them the types of questions that get them to say that, which you've done in this podcast, which is totally what you're
Exactly.
supposed to
Yeah,
do in an
yeah.
interview environment. However, if you then take this video and you edit out the parts that you thought best fit a narrative of another story you're telling, what you've done is you've taken me and you've made me you. You've just used me to hide what you're saying. And I hate doing that. I don't want to put somebody else's face over my message, take a guy from Ethiopia and make it look like now an Ethiopian saying this thing. I do some interviews, and that's when they request it because they want to say their specific message. But I'm not going out of my way to deliberately hide that this is still my opinion.
Mm,
Ultimately, the man who decided this video was me. I edited it. I edited their words, even if I interviewed them. And this woman was so offended by it because she'd worked in the industry and she felt that interviewing was the only way to be truthful. And I just completely disagree. I don't think there is a truthful. I think that there's only perception and opinion and frames, and you're presenting yours, I'm presenting mine, and I'm trying to be as objective as possible, but that's me trying to be objective. That's not objectiveness.
mm,
uh, and so whenever she says that to me, I got in a big argument with her because I said to her, well, honestly, I don't like how documentaries are made and I don't like how the news are made because they're deceiving you. And I don't like that form of deception. They are hiding many other parts of that interview. And there's a really good documentary that I watched in university and I've never been able to find since, where a guy took interviews with major American science and political figures and then through the power of these types of leading questions and editing, he made it look like the moon landing didn't happen and that all of these people agreed just through the sheer power of asking them specific
mm,
types of questions and then editing it a certain way.
mm,
And he
mm,
made a very compelling documentary about how the moon landing didn't happen. And then the last 5 to 10 minutes are just them realizing that they're being tricked, basically. It's just him then pulling back the curtain and being like, this is how I did it. Look
mm,
at how easy it is to deceive you.
mm,
Look at how easy it is to make this fake.
mm.
And so because of that, I can't watch most media anymore, especially documentary media, unless it's a how it's made type. Here's a canning process of peas or something that's so nuts and bolts. But once you start putting opinions on, just like with my series, I really want people to understand that this is just me saying it. And I try to get that across in every video. If you have a problem with the words that were said, you'll bring them to me. We've had people go to jail who we talked to in our series. We don't want that to happen, obviously,
Yeah,
because they
yeah.
speak out against their government. If you're going to come at somebody, come at me. And so I feel what you mean by you're never not on the job,
Mm.
even turning on something to relax. When I go on vacation, why am I not filming? Why
Mm,
am I not filming? I could be filming right now, this vacation, and making money and telling this story or that or this, or you just can't even go on vacation anymore because
mm.
there's no turning it off. And it's a blessing and a curse. It's both.
Yes, yeah, yeah. You get to go all these cool places, but you're working, and that's what people say to me. Like when I was in the industry, like with diving, I come, when we're back in Australia, I'd come back and visit family in Australia. And say, oh, come for a dive, come for a dive. I've never dived in Australia. And it's like, this is work. I'm on holidays. Like, I
Yeah. It
don't want
feels
to work,
wrong.
because you don't
Feels wrong.
realize my brain will switch back to work, because I will be observing and I will be trying to work out that, oh, that's a good thing to do. I'll do that. Let me quick take a photo of that. Let me ask this person about it so that I can fully understand how and why they do that. Yeah, you want to switch off. You want to relax. Yeah.
And you just can't. The best thing I can do is just become a tour guide. So I bring a friend and then I just take them on a tour, because then I'm still sort of working, but
Mm,
at the same time, I'm not. It's just the only way I can do it. Otherwise, I feel like I should be filming. I
yeah.
feel like that's missed footage. If I see a sign that I know one of my episodes, that would have been a really good image for that episode, it just cuts me. I don't have my camera. Okay, this is just going to disappear. No one will
Yeah.
ever even know this was the perfect thing, and no one
Yeah.
will ever even know. And every single, you see that 1,000 times a day, over and over and over again. And
Yeah.
so then you just start carrying the camera.
Yeah.
And
One of my sons, he's a professional videographer, and he went for a holiday, but to get it, but double up, get some footage. He went to Iceland, and he's rented a little van, and he's driving around for like 2 weeks.
yeah,
And late one afternoon, the perfect sunset, it's all, the lighting, everything's just right. So he quickly pulls over to the side of the road in the middle of nowhere, jumps out with his camera, runs down from the road down this big bank to get, to frame the shot, to get the light, and he's running to catch it all, gets the shot, videos or whatever he's doing. Beautiful. And he's got no shoes on, and it's the sun's about to go,
yeah,
and he's like, oh geez, it's getting cold. I better get back to the car. And he sort of gets back to the car. Where's my keys? Where's my keys? And somewhere along the way, the keys have fallen out of the car, out of his
oh
pocket.
wow,
And
oh
now he's like, oh, to get that
yeah,
shot. It's
yeah,
like he's actually put his life in danger, because he hasn't seen another car in like 4 or 5
oh yeah,
hours.
oh
He's in the
yeah.
middle of nowhere. And so he's tracing his steps through this low brush that's sort of below knee height, like
Yeah, yeah,
going
yeah, yeah.
through like down this couple of 100 meters down this bank, like trying, and he's thinking, I'm gonna have to break the window on the car, like just to
Uh,
get back in to stay warm for the night. And but eventually found the keys. Like, oh, I mean, probably really didn't need to lock the car when he hadn't seen anyone in 3 or 4 hours.
yeah,
But yeah, the things you do to get the shot at the right moment. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And just you, you don't always know where a thing's going to lead either. In Africa, two guys say they're going to take you to go see something, and then three-quarters of the way through it, you're like, well, I don't know if this is actually going to work out as well as I thought it was going to. I think we might need to immediately leave this situation. We were in Ethiopia, in Harar, which is a really cool city, ancient city, one of Africa's most ancient cities. Really, really cool place. And we're walking around the old town, which is awesome. It's got, can't even describe. But anyway, we meet these guys, they're really nice guys, and we're having drinks. We're quite drunk. And then all of a sudden, just a fight breaks out right next to us, and it's obviously about us, and we don't know what that is. Like, there's nobody going to translate it for us. But now we're in a bar where we don't know where we are, in the middle of Harar, just kind of by ourselves with the camera and everything. We got all this stuff, and now there's just a brawl going on about us. And now you got to decide, like, what are you supposed to do with that? You're supposed to join the brawl? Your guys are fighting. It's obviously about you. Do you wait it out? Do you leave? What are you supposed to do in that situation? And I come across that virtually every single day on the road, something of an equal or similar stupidity. Just like being arrested in Lebanon, that it just gets to the point where it's almost kind of funny, because they're so absurd. You face all these absurd moments that you can never really explain to somebody else. Even if you tell them the words, they'll never really get it. It was a very weird moment, and you had to be there for it. And that happens so often, but that's kind of the reason I love this job, and what keeps me coming back to it, even though the money's not great and there's a lot of dangers, that you never really know what's going to happen. And every single moment, stuff is just going on, and you're looking new floors, just constantly looking new floors, whether you want to or not. They're coming at you, and you got to do something to deal with it. It's there now. It's by force, by obligation, because you're there. In Somalia, we bribed police. You can call them police. They're whatever, the militia that considers themselves a police. We bribed them with this huge bag of drugs. And it was so normal because that's what you needed to do in this place that I didn't even think about it until years later that we had bribed the Somali police with drugs. Just as a sentence, that's an extremely absurd thing. But in practice, it's just like, it's just another thing you're doing. The cop asks for drugs. There's a drug dealer over there. Just go buy the drugs, give them to the cop. Everybody wins. But it's an absurd thing, when you reflect on it years later, and yeah, that makes the job a lot of fun.
Yeah. So a few times you've talked about growing up, being 17 in Japan, watching the 3-year-old boy lick the floor.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering now if you could go back in time and visit yourself in your early teenage years, that young Evan whose hormones are starting to rage, can't wait for muscles to properly form, hair to grow on your face. And that's, that's how I was when I was early teens. What emotions was he going through? And what would you say to him if you could travel back there now?
Oh, it's
and sit beside him.
Total mess. Complete
somewhere
mess.
between 13 and 17.
Yeah, that whole era. I'd say total mess, especially around 17, because I'd moved out into the world and I did not know what I wanted from the world. I just knew I wanted something, and I was in it now, and I was facing it. And like I said, I moved out at 13, but at 17, I moved across the world to go live by myself in Japan. So that's a very independent movement to make, especially at 17. And it was illegal. I was working illegally under the table. So back then, it's not like I wasn't a confident person. I would still somehow go back and tell myself that it's fine. It'll work out. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, and those won't work out. But the overall the arc of your life is that it will work out. And I think that's true of most people when they look at the arc of their life, is that the individual pieces, those are just dead ends. Those are the bodies that you're building as your corpse pile below yourselves that you grow. I think I would give myself that advice. But at the same time, you can't give advice. You have to face it. If it's like trying to explain being in Somalia with me, walking down the street, the tension. I can tell you about the tension. I can tell you that having a man 4 feet behind you saying CIA over and over again is uncomfortable. But to feel it is a very different thing. And so I think a lot of my advice is just to gain experience. I don't care what experience. I don't care which direction. I don't care if it works out for you. I don't care. Just gain it. Because especially if you're in your teens or early 20s, I always say spend every single penny on becoming a bigger person until you're 30. Every single penny. Whatever it'll, learn German or Japanese like I did, I don't care. Go learn woodworking or plumbing. It doesn't matter. All of those are skills. Every single thing is a skill. Public speaking is a skill. Joke telling is a skill. Doesn't matter what it is. Try stand up and fail. It doesn't matter. Do all these things because that experience is what gives you, as you call it, the intuition. That's your building blocks for making decisions. And if you don't have that experience, the decisions you make, as smart as you are, as capable as you are, just can't be right because you don't have enough variables to make the decision. 2 plus X equals 4 could be 2. It could be a bracketed, 1 plus 1. There's all sorts of things it could be. The inference is what eventually you stop licking floors because one tasted bad, so therefore they're all going to taste bad. And as true as that sort of is, you also have to understand that it's not, because you don't know. You're just making that inference, and inference will kill you. It will weaken you because you're not experiencing. The only thing I think that humans ever really learn from is personal experience. Anyone who's raised a child knows that you can tell them all day what the good idea is, and it does not mean they will follow the good idea. They need to go put their hand on the hot stove. Otherwise, they don't know what hot stove means. And I think that's true of all of us. So if I went back at 17, what can I really change? I got to mess it all up. Otherwise, I won't really understand it.
Good answer. All right. So I know we talked a lot about different places in the world, and this question for me to ask you is quite different to most people I ask it to, because you've seen so much of the world. But what sort of world do you see we live in right now? Is it good, bad, ugly, magnificent? How do you see it?
I think it depends on who you are. I think the world is 8.1 billion people, and every one of them has a different experience. Some of us live to be 5 years old in pure misery. Some of us live to 90 in opulence. I think our world has never really changed. We just sort of changed the words we use to describe stuff. Aristocracy, old money, these are just the same thing, right? We have slight differences and variations in the way that we operate our systems, our technologies. We live longer. There's a lot of positivity. I think we live in the best time to live in. But at the same time, humanity hasn't changed. Humans are no different than they were 10,000 years ago. Our behaviors, our desires, our needs, our wants, we're just better at filling them. So to me, I see the world as the same. I don't know if you've ever looked out at the surf where it's frothing and it's just constantly rebuilding and bubbling away that froth. I think we're that froth. You just bubble up and then you disappear, and you bubble up and disappear, and it never really goes anywhere, never really builds, never really dissipates. I think our world is just doing that, and we're experiencing it. And I think how you experience the world is very personal to you. The world itself is quite indifferent to it. You are the driving force of your own life, of your own experience, of your own mindset. Ooh, my tractor's arriving, so it's a bit loud in the background.
Yeah.
I live on an island. There's no roads, so if you want a car, it's a lawn tractor. I might have 200 years.
Right.
But yeah, if you want your life to go well, mess up a lot early. That's my belief. Because if you don't do that, you just never really, you can't do it when you're old. If you mess up past 30, people will judge you. If you mess up 17 to 20, my God, nobody cares. Nobody cares. They'll just be like, "Oh, you idiot," and then you just move on. It's over. If you mess up at 35, that is a stain. It's just how it is. So take those opportunities to challenge yourself and fail, and who cares? And by the time you're 30, you'll laugh about all of it. I don't know. Maybe actually, if I go back to 17, what would I really say? I'd say you won't remember 95% of the names of people you went to high school with. You won't even remember their name. At 35, you will be looking through a yearbook and be like, who are these people? That is time, You wait 18, 20 years and you just forget. It's just the past now. You're always living in the moment. And so building up those experiences, you could embarrass yourself so thoroughly and not even remember it by the time it actually fundamentally affects your life.
Yeah. Now I hear you there. So I've really enjoyed like the different slant you have on the world, because it's quite different to most people I interview. It's great. I've got your contact details. I'll put a link to your YouTube channel in the show notes. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention before we wrap up?
No, I thought that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd like to mention that I have ruined like 4 podcasts. I don't know how I always do it, but for some reason, I can't do podcasts well. So this is the first one where I felt like I've made it the whole way through. I have not somehow.
Well, you mean
devastated this thing.
You mean other people have interviewed you and you haven't?
Yeah. The other podcasts I've been on, I don't know, for something stirs in me.
Huh? There you go.
Well,
all right.
So I've survived it. I've managed.
Yeah, that's good. Excellent. Well, thank you for your time, and you can get back to your wife and your editing, and we're looking forward to your Lebanon and Greece and was it Crete?
Great, yeah. As is a YouTuber's life, it is 7:39 at night, and I have to start writing my scripts. So
there you go.
Back to work for me.
Back to work. All right, excellent. Yeah. And in Australia, I'm just starting my day. Thanks,
Devin. Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, we're at the end of another thought-provoking episode. Remember to subscribe so you'll be alerted to new episodes. I want to say thank you to the men who are joining me on this journey of intuitive development. I truly hope our time together has expanded your reality and reinforced trust in your ever-reliable gut feeling. Embrace your intuition. It will not lead you astray. Until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and trust your gut.